physical fighting prowess isn't necessarily the best judge of knowledge. And you can have somebody who knows a lot about martial arts, who is like kind of like a doctor in martial arts, who is old and out of shape and maybe couldn't stand up against somebody who's in the physical fit, like in their prime, who's training at athletic level right now. And does that mean that the person who's old should be demoted down, okay, to a lower rank? And if you start going down that rabbit hole, you start saying, well, if you're this tall, you can achieve this rank. Like, oh, you're only 5 feet, you can only get to green belt. But if you're 6 feet, you can get the black belt. And if you're a man, you can only get this, you can get this high. But if you're a woman, you can only get this high. Like, that's kind of a really dangerous, slippery slope to go down. And I think it's not really what we should be appraising when we're looking at rank.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Conversations from the Hearth. Today, we are joined again by Sensei Ramsey Veitch from Impulse Martial Arts up in Easton, Pennsylvania. Sensei Veitch, great to have you back on the show.
Thank you.
Yeah, welcome back. It's been a few months, I think, since we talked last. When was the last one we did? Like 2 months ago or so?
We did something about that.
March.
How has your school been doing last couple of months?
Yeah, doing good. Just you know, it's a small school, you know, and I don't teach children. I don't have a children's program yet, so you know, I don't have a huge thriving school. It's just I prefer my 10 to 20 adults that I can train with for right now. So looking into kids training shortly, but
Yes, sir.
not quite ready for that. Have to build up to that.
Sometimes those smaller schools can have a more intimate environment that's really special too. So now I see you have a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and Muay Thai kickboxing shirt on. Are you training in those as well right now, or?
I dabble in those here and there. So this is specifically from the McMahon Training Center out in Colorado, and Fort Collins, Colorado. And I was out there a couple months ago. And anytime I go out somewhere for either vacation or for work, I always look up a place to train. And you know, I found this place. They were open. And it was convenient for me to get there, so I went there and I trained, had a good time. So I said, you know, what's the mat fee? And they're like, oh, it's $20, you can buy a shirt. I said, okay, give me a shirt, give me a shirt, you know. And they prefer that because, you know, it's they get the name out there a little more. So but great group of guys, very, very nice. The instructor was very knowledgeable and kind and welcoming, and I like seeing that when I go out to visit different schools. So I'm all about learning. So I go out there. They even gave me a gi to train with because I didn't travel with my gi. So I was like, well, hey, that's awesome, you know. So yeah, you don't see that every day. You don't see that every day. So I was impressed.
Yeah. So last time you were on, we kind of touched on a topic about belt rank and promotion and the need for it. We were talking about, sometimes we see high ranked martial artists who don't have a lot of skill, and sometimes we see low ranked martial artists who are very talented, and sometimes it can be discouraging and make us feel like, well, does this rank mean anything? And I think that's a really good launching off point for us to begin a discussion on, what is the value of rank? Is this something that we should be, pioneering? I'm not pioneering, kind of carrying forward as a sort of legacy system that's very important? Or is it something that, is something from a bygone age that no longer has any relevance with the way that we approach and do martial arts these days? So what are your thoughts on that?
So, the rank, when I started my school, like 3.5 years ago, I I thought long and hard about while I'm developing my curriculum and modifying the curriculum I was I'd like to say raised on. I'm thinking like, how do I want to rank individuals, if at all? And ultimately, I consulted with other martial artists, people I personally know, and some other people that were notable, just people I found on YouTube. I'd reach out and be like, hey, what are your thoughts on this? People who have big schools and people who do similar arts or different arts. And ultimately, I came to discover that almost everybody's doing ranking systems, and there's nothing wrong with that. It really helps keep the students in line as far as like progressiveness, where they're going, how they're going to get there, what to focus on, milestones, all that good stuff. So I think belt rankings going up to black belt are very useful, especially in America, since Americans, I think we need that progressive milestone mentality. Like, hey, I am doing great, and it's not just my instructor saying, hey, you're doing fantastic, keep up the good work. It's like, you know what, I'm right here right now, and this is where I'm going next. And it's written right out for me. So I think it's a fantastic thing. That's how I progressed as a student, and I think it's only fair that I progress my students the same way. Now, as far as how people rank, I think that's where I think a lot of the problems arise, and it's basically because I believe there's a lack of standardization across the several different kinds of martial arts. People these days, people who don't know martial arts, one of the first things they ask you when they know you do martial arts is, are you a black belt? Right? That's the sentiment we get. And then you say, if you say yes, they say, oh, I bet you can really, kick some ass, or I bet you can, bet you can really handle yourself, or I bet you can do this. It's like, well, maybe not, but I don't try to get into long-winded discussions with them, because then I have to explain a lot of other things that they're just going to go right over their head, and you're just going to lose them, right? But yeah, so black belt is one of the most one of the highest honors you can get in a martial art. And unfortunately, I've personally witnessed, for example, my own instructor having given these belts away, and kind of took the integrity right out of it. And it really hits you hard when you see somebody who's not even up to your standard become, visually, rank wise, now the same standard or the same level as you. And it's just kind of one of those, well, now what's really going on here? Like, why, how could he give a black belt to this person when they're not up to par with me? And I can only really use myself, or another black belt that I admire or respect or whatever. So you see these things and you start to wonder, have you ever seen somebody get a black belt, or somebody who was a black belt that maybe you just kind of thought, how the heck did you ever get that thing? Has that ever happened to you guys?
Oh man, of course. I've known thousands of black belts all over the world in my life, and I've seen a huge range. But I think we kind of have to like dissect it from the ground up. So first, what a black belt means in Western perception is very different from what it means in Eastern culture. So if you go all the way back to Jigoro Kano and the foundation of like the white belt and the black belt and all the color belts and the Dan system, at that time, a black belt was just somebody who was a competitor, somebody who knew the fundamentals and enough to go out and compete for the school and not get totally murdered in an open tournament. And if you look at Korea, even now, they don't have color belt tournaments. Color belt tournaments is more of a Western notion. And the reason why we have it is that very few people were able to get to that just kind of beginning benchmark standard of a black belt. So we decided to basically make tournaments for the color belts. And now when you go to a tournament, a lot of times there's like the black belt meeting before the tournament, and the people who have black belts aren't really doing the tournament, they're running it. And that's so different from how it is in Korea. In Asian culture, it would take usually, and the amount they train is different, but it would take about 1 year to get first on, 2 more years to get second, 3 more years to get third, 4 more years to get fourth, about 10 years to achieve a 4-3 black belt. Now that would be somebody who is training 5 days a week, very committed, and usually ended up going to college for Taekwondo, and in college was training at a team level, 3 to 8 hours a day, and is a phenomenal athlete. This 4-3 black belt in Taekwondo is much more akin to a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu than a 4-3 black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, because in West, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu comes out of judo and Asian martial arts, but it comes through the American filter, the American lens. And what happened was these Americans would be able to go over, in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu it's a little bit different, but Americans would go over to Japan. They would be able to train there for a couple of years while they're in the military. They get their first or second degree black belt, and they come back to America and they can't promote anyone past their rank. So they made it take like 10 years to get a black belt. And they said a black belt means I'm an expert, but a black belt never meant you were an expert. It's become that meaning now. And I'm not, when I say this, I don't want to like, there's some first degree black belts that are absolutely masters and experts. And it's not, like you said, there's standardizations all over the place. That's one of the problems, but it all started at this point where, the Asians had a very different system, and we kind of chopped it up and made it our own and changed what it meant. And because of that, we in the West, we think a black belt means you're an expert. And of course, an expert needs some substantial time, usually about 10 to 20 years. In Taekwondo, it takes about 20 years to become a Taekwondo master. In the olden days, now standards have been slipping and things have been changing, and it's gone down quite a bit, and that's regrettable, and that's also caused more confusion. But just to get back on topic, it's all kind of started because we didn't really understand what these ranks meant. And I think for us to begin to understand how different a black belt can be at different schools, we kind of have to understand where we started. And yeah.
If I can hop in here. So Sensei Veitch, I can't quite speak to black belts not living up to my expectation because I don't have my black belt yet. And so that would feel a little weird. But I think this conversation about standardization is really, really fascinating to me, because even coming up through our program for these past few years, and talking with these other master instructors from around the country, from around the world, it is so different, right? In all these different places and all these different styles, there are a lot of different things that are focused on, a lot of different emphasis across the board. And so the question really does become, well, how do we take this massive body of knowledge that is the martial arts, that is, maybe the martial arts with a capital M, capital A, and find out some way that we can be able to look at somebody who may have practiced, Kung Fu for their whole life, and just one of the iterations of Kung Fu, and say, oh, I have an understanding of your level of proficiency based on, this larger context. And to do that in a way that isn't, let me put myself up against you in the UFC ring and see who beats the snot out of the other person, right? Like it's so.
Well, I think there's another layer to this too,
Yes,
which is that physical fighting prowess isn't necessarily the best judge of knowledge. And you can have somebody who knows a lot about martial arts, who is like kind of like a doctor in martial arts, who is old and out of shape and maybe couldn't stand up against somebody who's in the physical fit, like in their prime, who's training at athletic level right now. And does that mean that the person who's old should be demoted down, okay, to a lower rank? And if you start going down that rabbit hole, you start saying, well, if you're this tall, you can achieve this rank. Like, oh, you're only 5 feet, you can only get to green belt. But if you're 6 feet, you can get to black belt. And if you're a man, you can only get this, you can get this high. But if you're a woman, you can only get this high. Like, that's kind of a really dangerous, slippery slope to go down. And I think it's not really what we should be appraising when we're looking at rank. I think rank is really a judgment of technical ability and commitment to the martial arts, knowledge, like these things are what rank signifies. And even if we could standardize rank across the board in all disciplines, like there was some organization that came out and said, all right, here's a stamp of approval. This person is an expert. It doesn't matter what discipline they're in. And by the way, that's kind of a little bit what we're trying to do with One Way. Even if you could do that, it would really only be within that system. It would not be outside of it. And that's part of the problem that we have is we don't really have, we're not unified. We're not codified. If you look at like medicine or something, there's like one board of medicine. There's not like 20,000 boards of medicine that are certifying different people at different levels. And that's what's happened. And that's why no one really knows what a black belt is. And so what I always tell martial artists who are struggling with this is don't compare yourself to other people. I mean, that's just a basic lesson in the martial arts. And definitely don't compare your black belt to any other black belt out there. The standards that your master put in place in his school are the standards that reflect what your black belt means. And, in some schools, it takes 1 year to get a black belt. Some schools, it takes 20 years to get a black belt. Those are not the same thing. Those are not the same thing at all. Yeah.
So Sensei Veitch, my question for you on this, that was just a lot of information and a lot of different places we just went. My question for you comes back to the central question of what for you are the components that make up rank, whether it's a white belt, whether it's a yellow belt. Like we talk a lot about the qualitative components, the skill, the respect, the discipline, the focus, the spirit. But there are quantitative components as well of time and rank, right? And time on the mats and time training and, time spent helping out around the dojo, maybe, like all these different things. And I'm curious, when you start thinking about this, what are some of those focus points for you determining?
Right. Yeah. So firstly, I agree with everything that you said about, the different standardizations and, about black belt and all that good stuff. Now, when I think of rank, when I'm judging my students now, I'm the only person who can judge my students and promote them, if you will, right?
Yes, sir.
So if I say that this person has met X, Y, and Z, and then another person comes in and says, no, they haven't satisfied X, Y, and Z, or they've satisfied X, Y, and Z a long time ago. You could have 3 different people looking at the same student where they are, and all 3 of them may or may not say that they're either here, here, or here. And that's kind of where that standardization goes away. Now I'm hoping that that most people will agree with us on the criteria of being a black belt. I've heard several different responses from other people. Some, like a guy that I work with that I highly respect, mentioned that, when it comes to being a black belt, the last thing he mentioned about was technique and skill. One of the first things that he's mentioned was, somebody who can lead from the front and somebody who's overall knowledgeable of the art. But also he threw that idea of them being a leader in there, which is, I thought was pretty cool. The criteria I personally go by is, I think there should be an appropriate level of skill that's that can be demonstrated per whatever martial art you're doing. Now, I rank in 4 different martial arts, each one with different criteria. So you have punching and kicking, right? Art, you have like a kempo, you have a throwing art like jujitsu, grappling, you have aikido, and samurai swords, stuff like this. So they all have their own like little criteria, and the criteria I tend to look for is, yeah, they should know what their rank level is. They should know how to demonstrate it without too much time lapse. No thinking about it, hesitating. You should at least be kind of on point with these. And whenever you hit a specific rank level, I don't expect perfection, right? I mean, I really don't expect perfection in any rank ever, right? But I expect them to perform them well and without too much hesitation, especially from a classical position or just a kata-ish format. And then being able to articulate about the martial art in a way that they can explain or at least attempt to explain what they're doing, and maybe a little bit of why they're doing it. This just helps them to get the understanding of, well, what am I doing and why, and how is this going to help me, right? I try to put everything into a self-defense perspective, but realistically, I mean, honestly, a lot of the techniques that we do in an art that has dozens and tons of techniques, most of them are relatively useless when you take them out individually and say, hey, look, I'm going to do this technique when I'm in a fight. You're probably not going to, right? But the attributes that you're learning from those techniques is really what you're getting out of it, and that's what I try to pull out of my students when I get them articulating about these techniques. And so that goes all the way up to black belt. So by the time somebody reaches black belt, I got a black belt test coming up in a month for one of my students. He is to demonstrate different in this specific art, different strikes. He needs to know terminology. He's allowed to mess up. He's allowed to forget things. He's allowed to not utilize the correct strike. You're allowed to be human, essentially. Mm-hmm. But he just has to, in my mind, while I'm watching him, just demonstrate and be a good example overall of a martial art that he's testing for. And I should just be able to say, you know what, you look like somebody who knows Kempo. You sound like somebody who knows Kempo. And that's based on my own standards. So when we go back to the standardization, somebody else might look at him and be like, wow, I'm surprised he wasn't a black belt already. Or somebody more experienced or more maybe more arrogant, I don't know, might say, that's not a black belt. Are you kidding me? So it's kind of like, well, what do you do with that? But yeah, so those are the things that I look for. And then naturally they have to be a good role model and a good example in the dojo overall. I am a fan of mat time. I am a fan of being regular in your training, but I'm not a stickler of, you have to have 200 hours, right? I mean, if you're going to demonstrate the martial art and you come regularly, but you can't come maybe like 5 days a week or whatever criteria some people might hold them to, that's okay with me, because sometimes people like me, I'd go home and train. I might not go to my back deck and start punching a punching bag or practicing anything, but I do a lot of meditation revolving my martial arts training. And I tell my students, hey, go home. You don't have to practice physically, but sit on the couch, lay in bed before you go to sleep, like I do, and I get sleepless nights because of it. Or just relax somewhere and think about your technique. Think about what you learned today. Think about your form. Think about when you could use it in a situation if you wanted to go there, right? Just thinking about it and not physically practicing it is I'm not going to say it's equivalent, but it's going to be sufficient enough just to get you better, instead of just going home and forgetting everything and then coming back. So, you know, if you see a student progressing and they don't come to class that often, but they're still progressing, then I usually attribute it to that kind of mental training out, you know, outside the dojo. Because I've done a ton of that, and I believe personally that it's helped me.
Well, there's some studies that have shown that that is very important. You know, I think they did some study where they had people play basketball like for 20 minutes a day or something, and they had people think about shooting the basketball into the hoop for 20 minutes, and the results were really similar actually. So what level that affects, I'm not exactly sure. I'm not sure if it's like a, you know, exactly a 1-to-1, but I do think it does help. And, you know, if you've ever tried to visualize your technique, like your body going through the motions before you do your kick or your punch, you always seem to do it twice as good as if you just kind of throw it out there randomly. So for sure.
Yeah. So yeah, so I mean, that's how I've done things. That's how I expect my students to do things, you know, especially when they need to make more time for training. That's because I can't open the dojo 24/7. You know, so that's how I advise them to train outside. And you know, I got students that come often and they don't progress fast, but I also have students that don't come often, they progress just fine. And then I have students who obviously will come often and progress very well, you know, very quickly. So naturally, everybody's different too, different abilities. One thing I don't do with black belt testing specifically, and we're going to go beyond black belt criteria soon, but is I always take into account the age, the body size, you know, bodily limitations, maybe like an injury or something, you know, any kind of a disorder they might have. I always take that stuff into consideration because you'd be a fool not to, you know, and that's why the criteria doesn't necessarily, it's not absolute for everybody, you know. Yeah, not everybody is. I don't expect everybody to perform as I performed for any of my black belt tests, but you know, one of the things that like I said before, I disagree with is when somebody is just obviously not the same, like they don't know the criteria, they don't know how to do certain techniques at all, they don't have the criteria rank, you know, curriculum wise, and yet they still get promoted to the rank, and you know, and I've seen that many times. It's disconcerting. It really is. It's odd, and if it happened in the school I used to go to, then it's happening a lot of places, because even my instructor was very all about honor and integrity and all that stuff. And then as the years went by, that started dwindling down. You know, that integrity started dwindling down. And then next thing you know, you got black belts who are just, they don't know half the stuff I do at, you know, brown belt or whatever. It's like, it just didn't make, and I wasn't even holding myself to a super high standard. So I thought it was, you know, really interesting.
I agree that does happen, and it's very unfortunate. But another thing to think about here is, if I came to your school and I looked at your students, I might not, and I'm not saying, I mean, I have no idea, I'm just saying this, but I might not think every black belt that you have there deserves their black belt. And one of the reasons I might feel that way is because I don't really know the trials and tribulations that those people went through under your guidance that allowed you to form a long-term opinion of them that is more true than my quick initial like pronouncement about how their abilities. You mentioned, like, you take into the fact that someone is old, or somebody has, you know, missing a limb, or, you know, they have, you know, sort of mental issues. From my perspective, being new on the mats, just judging people like empirically, I might not take that into account as well as you. Like, you saw that even that though that person was old, they picked themselves off the mat every single day, pushed themselves to achieve that black belt. And even though they might not be able to beat this 25-year-old jacked guy over here who's more of an athlete, you know, he's got twice the heart of that athlete. And because of that heart, you've promoted him up to the rank that he deserves based on the 15 years he's been doing it. This guy's only been doing it for 7, and he might be able to beat him in a fight, but this guy's been doing it for 15 and he's got a lot of heart. And so I think that's another thing that we need to take in consideration. I had a master friend who would always tell me, no one deserves to judge another master's students. Like, only that master really knows what those students have gone through. And so that belt is really a relationship between that master and that student. I think where things become complicated is that there's just no standardization in the martial arts at all. So it's hard for us to figure out, well, how do these things all match up? And I personally think that's a bit of a fallacy with the way that martial arts are laid out right now in our current system to try to do that, because you're just setting yourself up for frustration. It's one of the reasons why standardization is needed so much. And I don't even really care what people teach. Like with One Way, and what we're trying to achieve here is, we don't care if you're a grappler or you're a striker or you're a weapons guy. We do want you to know the core skills for self-defense as we have developed them in the last 30 years. You know, a lot of that is what you would see in mixed martial arts. But everything else that is incorporated in martial arts, from history, kinesiology, philosophy, you know, the most traditional of things to the most progressive of things, all comes under one roof. And it's a good thing to have that, because it's out of that big grab bag that we learned what we know today. And if we try to just distill everything down to this cookie cutter form, we're going to really be missing out on the broader picture that exists out there. It sounds like you've gone to a number of schools, and even your school itself, you might feel like the standards are slipping or some people are misranked, but I think it's a really hard judgment to pass, because you don't really know what these people have been through. Now, in the case of your master instructor, I have been to schools like that myself. And that's one of the reasons why I feel so strongly about rank integrity with my school. I've been ranking people for 20 years, and I have probably ranked less than 10 people to black belt. Now, that's probably going to change in the future, because now I have a big school and I'm getting more successful in the martial arts. And so I'm producing better and better martial artists. And I think that in the future, I'm going to have a lot more than 10 black belts. But I'm saying that because I want you to know that I don't just give these things out, and I have high standards, but even I feel like it's really hard to quantify that. You know, I've been trying, when I was young, my opinion was like, if you can't, you have to be the best yellow belt before you can become a green belt. You have to be the best green belt before you can be a blue belt. And if you're a blue belt and you get beaten by a yellow belt, maybe you need to go back to yellow belt. And that's really changed as I've matured as a martial artist and really seen how that's a sort of impossible task. And something that Jesse and I were talking about earlier today is, one of the greatest things about the martial arts is it provides a complete life pathway that you can do your whole life. And a 9th, 8th, and 9th degree black belt is not going to be beating a 4th and 5th degree black belt who's in the prime of their life. But that 8th and 9th degree black belt is going to have an incredible amount of wisdom and life experience that that young buck needs to know. It's much like the grandfather has a lot to teach the young father, even though he might be more vigorous and healthy. That older person has a lot of wisdom to share. And it's one of the only things in life that does, I think it's the only example of that in our entire system. Like, you know, if you want to be a doctor, once you get your PhD, you guess you can get your doctorate, but it basically, once you're done with your training, you're done. You don't need to go back and keep training. But in the martial arts, once you get your master's certification, you're still only a 4th degree black belt, and there's still so many dans ahead of you, and you can't get those until you're like a 70-year-old man. And even when you get 9th dan, you're hoping that one day you can get 10th dan when you pass away. So you're never stopping this learning process. And that's something that's so unique to the martial arts. And I think it's one of the reasons why we have trouble internalizing this whole debate. We don't really understand how martial arts should match up with other things in our society, because there's nothing else in our society like it.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. The sometimes I will explain the ranking system kind of like college and college degrees, and usually I'm just like, you know what, you get a 4-year bachelor's degree in, let's say, I don't know, accounting, right? I would say at the end of 4 years of doing an accounting major, you probably know a darn good bit about accounting, but you're by far an expert, you're not like, you don't know everything. And I kind of equate that to black belt, where they know quite a bit of stuff, but right. And so yeah, go ahead.
No, what I would say though is everybody I know, no matter what profession they go into, even my father, who's a doctor, he said when he graduated medical school, he knew nothing about his profession. Like people would call him a doctor, but he was like terrified because he was supposed to be doing this stuff and he had no idea how to do it. And every profession is like that. Okay. When you graduate with your degree, like I had a friend who graduated with a business degree and I was asking him, okay, I'm starting my own business. What can you teach me? I'm thinking about going back and getting a business degree so I'm better prepared to start my own business. And he's like, man, I don't know a single thing that you could use in your business, honestly. It's just a bunch of hoops I had to jump through to get this certificate so that now I can start learning. And that's what most of education is.
Right.
And the funny thing is, that's the one thing we look at. We look at, do you have this degree? But really, and this is why martial arts is beautiful, you learn most of it from doing. And so the guy who's been being a doctor for 20 years, he knows much more about medicine than the graduate who just comes off the line. Maybe he knows a few of the more modern medicines a little bit better, in the back of his head, but he doesn't really know how the practice of medicine works. And so that's internalized by those like higher dons.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah, my thoughts about school are the same way. Like, academics in at least in America, I do agree that most people don't graduate with 4-year and master's degrees, knowing much about their actual profession, because they're just filled with all this other filler and all this stuff. Like they're by no means, but the idea is they should be masters of accounting at the end of 4 years, right? Otherwise, why are you going to school? Well, realistically, like you had said, they don't really know anything until they get into the field and they start realizing that this is how the real world works. This is how accounting actually is.
It's the same reason. It's the same reason that those YouTube warriors who just watch these YouTube videos don't actually know how to do those techniques until they come into a dojo and they train in them for many years. Like your mind can know something, but you don't know it until you do it.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. And so then I say, well, if you were going to equate it like that, now you have like a master's degree, a couple more years of practice, maybe some extra schooling, some extra practice. Boom, now you can get your knee done, and then you start going kind of from there. But I just say, look, you're going to go to school for 4 or 5 years, and then you'll be eligible for black belt, give or take, depends on how much time you put in, extra effort off the mats, yada yada yada. But anyway, so now it's like, well, what about all these rankings after Shodan, right, or after first degree black belt? Where do these people start getting these extraneous ranks from? And I've seen, and a lot of this is due to stuff I've personally witnessed in my own organization that I was, that I was raised in for martial arts. So that's where I formed a lot of opinions, because I saw a lot of this stuff and I'm like, ugh. So when I go to a school personally, I'm the last person to judge. This person's a blue belt, this person's a purple belt, I'm just there to spar or to learn or to hang out and whatever. Like I don't care. Most of the time, I don't even tell people what rank I am or what, unless I'm directly asked. And because I'm not there to do anything but learn and potentially share information. There's this ideology that, hey, you say you're a black belt and now you get treated differently a little bit. Sometimes good, but sometimes for the worse. Like, if you go into a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu dojo, for example, I'm not a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu yet. I'm just a blue belt, but my instructor for BJJ says, when you go to another gym and they know you're a black belt, they're gunning for you. That's a huge responsibility right there. And naturally, you're not going to win every bout. You do enough of them, and there are a few people that can go around destroying the entire school honorably and just taking everybody out. But most of the time, yeah, you can get picked off by somebody who is lower ranked than you. It's expected, especially when they're like your age, my age, right? When we're 40 or 40 plus, we can we have to accept defeat before we get a permanent injury, especially if we're going against somebody lower ranked, but they just happen to be more fit or more agile or just crazier on the mats than we are, right? Because you said you have done BJJ for a while, so any kind of a sparring like that when you're matched up, age plays a huge role. Sex, weight, all that stuff plays a huge role depending on the whatever you're competing in or sparring in.
Yeah.
But I'm the last person who's going to judge the next person, but all the stuff that I've witnessed, I feel as though I'm allowed to judge because, these are people that I train next to day in and day out. And then, seeing them promoted in a way where they put in less time and they have considerably less skill set than I do. And they don't have enough age or weight or limitation differences to account for the speed in which they achieved this rank, and in disrespect to them specifically, it's just unfortunate that they weren't upheld to specific standards that I was, and this is coming from people that were all about upholding good standards. So they kind of went back and became hypocrites of themselves many years later. So it's really unfortunate. So I just wanted to clear that up in case maybe you thought that I was going and judging other people. Definitely not.
I don't think you're judging other people. I'm right there with you. I've had those same experiences too. And I'm just trying to open up the debate and, say, play devil's advocate and talk about different issues that could really be going on there. It definitely happens. Back in the 90s, we went through a phase where they were really marketing the belt, and McDojos and belt factories are definitely a thing. I do think that they're on a steep decline because people are looking for serious martial arts. They want rank that means something, and that's a good thing. I also think there's some other stuff that's going on there too. Like, as you do martial arts longer, you gain a better understanding of how good you really are. The better you become, the better people you encounter, and the better you can kind of place yourself and realize just how great you could be. And when you do that, you start to judge yourself more accurately as you become a more proficient martial artist. And that makes you kind of go back and say, oh, maybe I wasn't as great as I thought I was when I was a first degree black belt. And maybe I need to, as I'm raising up the next generation, not hold them to an unreasonable standard, because my standard for myself was not actually realistic. And so that's one effect. And then another thing is, as I've gained more rank, I'm definitely the kind of person that believes very strongly in rank integrity. But I will say that when I was a low dan, I was really hard and brutal on people trying to gain rank. And as I'm more of a higher dan, I have a better viewpoint to kind of look at all the ranks and say, and I'm not so threatened by them, and say, you know what? I've taught thousands of white belts and yellow belts, and I've realized that they all suck, and a lot of these people just drop out like flies. So me giving out that first yellow belt, maybe I'm not as reserved as I was 20 years ago when I was a first or second degree black belt. So you gain more perspective, and then you start thinking, really, maybe these standards I set were unreasonable. Sometimes like I set some standards that I was like, well, this is what you need to be a professional martial artist. This is what I went through. Train 8 hours a day, 6 days a week. And then I realized, whew, I haven't even met one person that can that can handle that standard. Maybe that standard is ridiculous. Maybe that standard can only be shown at a outside of rank. Okay. And one of the reasons, let's go back a step, because you were talking about how, Americans really are obsessed with Dan, and Koreans aren't that obsessed with it. And one of the reasons why is that Dan becomes kind of irrelevant when you're talking about really high competency. Like in Korea, you can go from a very early age and go out to the elementary school team, which you'll be training like our wrestling teams are here, but even more. You'll be training, potentially 8 hours a day, 6 days a week. You won't even go to school anymore. You'll live in basically a stable with your master who tells you what you can eat and when you can sleep and all this kind of stuff. You have to shave your head. You can't have a boyfriend, all that kind of stuff. And in that kind of a system, being a part of that system trumps any Dan. Because if you just train 2 hours a day, or 2 times a week like this, like recreationally, you'll never achieve this level. You'll never achieve it. You could train for 500 years. You'll never achieve it. So they say, well, the Dan system is for the recreational martial artists. They can kind of go up. But then there's things above that. That's like, you are a national team member. You are a world champion. You are a coach of a really high level team. Like that kind of a thing is way more prestigious. So what I find actually in the Korean community is they care about, the weirdest thing about Koreans is they care so much about certification. They don't care at all about your story. So like Americans, they care a lot about your story. You can weave a compelling story and you could be like a first degree black belt and people would follow you to the end of the earth. But if you tell that same story to a Korean, they're like, yeah, what is your certification? And they only care about that, right? But the weirdest thing is in the world of certification, they don't care nearly as much about Dan as we do. And I was trying to scratch my head as I was living over there, trying to figure out why that was. And it's because there are so much more prestigious things, titles and ranks that you can hold than Dan. Like my father, who I lived with, was the Secretary General of the Jalabukto Taekwondo Association. And even though that's like not the highest position in that organization, he was like a god amongst Taekwondo practitioners. People were, bowing, like really like high level world champions and high level professionals, high Dan martial artists were bowing to him and showing him a ton of respect. That was a much higher level position. And even the professors at the university were seeing that as a higher level profession. And the professors were much higher. It doesn't matter what Dan you are, being a professor at a university was much more impressive than being like a 7th degree black belt. Much more impressive. And so there's all these different ways, being an international referee, being like a top coach. And it's something that we can't really understand. And so we just obsess, everything boils down to Dan rank in the West.
Part of my my criteria also leading up to black belt is I'm a firm believer in giving as much information and making sure people are as competent as possible leading up to black belt. And hopefully nothing I say will offend you during my conversation with you. But I tend to say that I think being ranked up by your instructor, if you have one, is fine. I think that's no problem. Many systems are based on time and commitment after black belt, and some are more criteria based until maybe like 5th Dan. All right, those are the ones I'm more familiar with. So in the system I used to be a part of, it was criteria. There was specific techniques and whatnot for all the way up to 5th degree black belt, and quote unquote Shihan status as they referred to it. And so, throughout my training, it was, well, Ramsey, you're learning this, and this right now, right? Okay, look, now you're a black belt. And then the criteria after black belt was like, techniques that you can learn day one at a judo school down the road. It's like, well, now that's a little weird, right? So I'll just stick with the jiu-jitsu curriculum, for example. There's stuff that I will teach my students that 3rd degree black belts in my instructor school, they don't even know. And that's where we get into this slippery slope where it's like, well, how did they even become a black belt without knowing such a basic technique, a technique that is highly used in judo jiu-jitsu, and yet these people don't even know about it. And I'm teaching it almost day one. And I'm not, again, I'm not trying to be like, well, I'm superior in how I teach and my curriculum is the best and this and that and the other thing. But things like that kind of make it interesting when I say, why are they constantly trying to keep information from me? And so as I'm ranking through, it was always, nope, you have to wait until you're this rank to get this technique. Okay, and that bothered me for many years. But I bowed my head, I respected it. That's just the way it is. There's probably a reason for it, right? And then as I got more advanced and I became more competent and capable, I started thinking about it like, why are they hiding technique from me? Why won't they show me these things when they could be useful, when I can learn from them? And so they use such a criteria-based ranking system up way past black belt.
Yeah.
And I personally felt like they were just hiding things and don't get me wrong, these were not techniques that were proprietary by any means. These are not techniques or things that were formulated or kept a secret by families of generations and generations. Nothing like that. The same techniques you can find day one at another judo jiu-jitsu school. Yeah. So part of my thing was, well, if they're not going to give it to me, I'll get it somewhere else. Now with the days of YouTube and being able to get see instruction and get instruction online or visit schools all day every day, you can find this information anywhere, especially if you're competent enough to understand it just by watching a video. You can get this information anywhere. So so they didn't like being called out on that. So now they have that. And just for a little bit of clarity, I was dealing with instructors that were pronouncing themselves 10th degree black belts at 40 years old.
Yeah.
And that got me thinking, well, hey, 10th degree black belt, it's pretty prestigious in the world of Dan. It's pretty high up there. You must really know your stuff. And I'm never gonna say that my instructors didn't know their stuff. They do. The information was solid, but they were throwing rank around like it was nothing. And I would naturally just be, I would watch a kendo documentary, and they said you couldn't even become a what was that? I think it was it was all about 8th Dan in kendo, and you couldn't even become an 8th Dan in kendo until you were at least 50 years old or something like that. And then you see other 10th Dan around the world, karate, jiu-jitsu, whatever, and they're all older masters, and then so now you have this dilemma where, well, who am I getting trained by? Somebody who cares about their rank and title more than the training, or are they more concerned with just pretending, just because they signed 10th Dan after their name on every letter, that should be automatically accepted and seen as an honorable thing. It's just a really weird thing.
So, I mean, whatever, I don't know what organizations these are that are giving out these 10th dans, but, first of all, I can just say I'm a 10th dan. It wouldn't mean anything. I'd be in an organization of one, I'm a 10th dan. Okay, fine. But no one cares about it.
To the next person, they're like, "Ooh, really? That's cool."
If it is a bigger organization and they're giving out a 10th dan, which, by the way, in most traditional martial arts is a post-mortem award given out after the person's dead. So it's hilarious that you'd be a 10th dan.
Trust me, some of these people are 12th dan by now. It's completely skipping 11th. I'm just going to throw that right out there. Okay,
sure. But whatever discipline that is, that when they promote that person at 40 to 10th dan, that's the new standard. And it's basically undercut everyone who came before that trained harder. And now that's how that discipline is known to the greater martial arts community. That's what a 10th dan looks like, 40-year-old person with that amount of skill. And so that's why you got to be really careful with those promotions, right? If someone's going to get it early, they have to stand above the crop. They have to be like someone famous who's basically pioneering the discipline to get that, like BJ Penn. I think he got his black belt in like 3 years or something in BJJ. Like, well, that was someone who was pioneering that art. That makes sense. But, just some layman, getting a black belt early, it doesn't make sense. I will say, okay, there was a number of things you brought up, but we'll kind of want to go back to this idea of, well, there's some techniques that I know that I'm not being taught at this particular gym. And it makes me feel like this person just doesn't know those things. Now, first of all, that could be true. Like maybe that person, let's just say something hilariously simple, like an arm bar. That person really doesn't know how to do an arm bar, and they teach it well, maybe, and they don't teach it until a very high level. Okay, that would be a weird technique to not do because it's such a fundamental thing, but let's just say that's the case. It could be that in that gym, they have a different soup that they've mixed up, a different way of playing the game of jiu-jitsu that doesn't really rely much on arm bars, and more it's going to be more about like, rear naked chokes or inverted stuff or whatever it might be. And I think, you could look at it like this person just doesn't know much, or you could say, well, whatever this person does, they probably know very well, and that's their game that they play. And that's the way I tend to look at it. There's certainly things like I go and train all over the place, and I'll go in places and I catch people with, my clever tricks that they've never seen before. But I don't like say that that's because they don't know their stuff. It's just that these are the tricks that I've learned. And
right.
when you have that kind of a mentality, when you come together with other martial artists, there's a lot to learn and a lot to share. And it's coming from a place of mutual respect. And so now, like, there's another concern too, like in a lot of BJJ schools now, they don't do crab claw takedowns. They don't do leg locks until about blue belt. There's a lot of these kind of rules, and the reason why they've done those is for safety. Because people just don't know. They don't know their limits, and they can, the crazy white belt who just tries to go ham and ends up hurting people. And so they try to make these rules, and I think that's perfectly fine too. The only instance that I would start to get a little bit peeved about it, maybe, is if they start holding off knowledge so that I can't beat them. But I also think that's a really arrogant opinion to have. Like, if somebody is good, they will beat you whether you try to hide the truth from them or not. They're going to figure it out on their own.
I personally think that it was more of a it's a motivation to keep you around type thing, by having criteria.
Okay, so here's another thing that
now we get into the money aspect of it. Instead of the, I want you to be such a good martial artist. Now it's like, now we're gonna hold stuff back until 3 dons from now, and then you'll get this information that is really nothing to gawk about. It's like, ugh.
Well, I mean, let's play devil's advocate there, because you do want to keep some stuff back so you can keep them motivated, so you can keep putting things in front of them that excite them and keep them interested. If I just fire hose you with everything you could possibly need to know on day one, Then on day 2, I have nothing to teach you. And then you
Right.
get bored and you quit. So you
Right.
want to stretch it out so that you can keep them entertained for a long time, because it's going to take a long time for people to get good. And you also don't want to teach them too much, because you want them to focus on the fundamentals, because fundamentals are so important. So, there's a lot of stuff like, and sometimes my students are like really, kind of like, oh man, I wish I could get to like spinning back kick and spinning hook kick. They're not that advanced techniques, right? But
Right.
I don't teach them when they're like white belts and yellow belts and green belts. At that level, we're focused on more of the basic techniques. And it's not that I couldn't, it's that I choose not to, because I want them to focus on those techniques. And there's this natural desire for students to want to move past their curriculum. Oh, I want to learn more. I want to, what those red belts are doing, I want to be doing that. But if you rush there too soon, you'll miss the lessons that are contained within those techniques that you're supposed to be working on right then and there. And so I think it's actually quite arrogant when students want to like learn it all and want to get to the end, because they're missing the lessons that are right there in front of them. And how, I mean, I'm sure you've had this experience where you're working with a student and they're missing the lesson that you're trying to teach them right now because they're so obsessed with the next lesson. How many times have you taught a move, let's say jiu-jitsu, for example, some takedown or sweep or submission, and they're like, well, what if I do this? It's like,
Oh yeah, all the time.
like, yeah, but let's focus on this right now. Like, of course, there's usually a counter for every single thing. And by the way, that counter is completely stupid. You just be walking right into this, but that's beside the point. The reason why you don't know that that's stupid is because you just don't know enough about the martial arts yet. So let's just get back on topic and learn this first move so that then we can learn the next move. And so that's why, yes and no. Like I don't, the only case I wouldn't like it is if there was some undue amount of time that you were just sitting at rank doing the same thing for years and years and years, just so you could learn like a spinning hook kick at like 4th degree black belt.
Yeah, that's kind of where I was going with all that. Yeah. And most of what I was talking about for sure is when you're upper rank or upper level or an advanced student, and then you start. So up until I became a black belt, I never questioned anything. I never cared about what was next I mean, I said, oh, that looks cool, I can't wait to learn that. But I never said, hey, teach me on the side or something, because I just respected the curriculum. But when I teach my students, I'll usually focus on their curriculum. And then if their curriculum is, maybe I don't want to teach them, a piece of their curriculum, like a Banseonagi or something, a throw or like a wrist twist or something, then I will say, okay, look, what we're doing right now is an advanced technique, a technique that you don't need to focus on right now, but for all intents and purposes, you're able to do it and you're going to learn how to do it. But it's not because I want you to learn the move necessarily. I'm just exposing you to it. But you can forget about the move today. But what you're going to do is you're going to learn all these other things, and I'll point out what they're learning at the same time that they're doing this technique. It's just maybe that technique's more relevant in what I'm trying to teach them. Not every technique teaches what you want to transpose to your students. So I might be like, well, look, you want to lift this person up, do this, right? And this throw is really good for that. So I'll show them that throw instead. Just to kind of go over those fundamentals. And then I say, you know what, forget the whole technique. Because they'll come back to me, like you had said, and be like, well, how do you do that technique again? It's like, forget about it. Then they got, that the whole point is to get it in their head, to get it in their muscle memory, get it in their subconscious. Then when they revisit it later, so one of my upper level students, he can handle a lot of information. So I'll show him things, even if it's outside of his criteria. But he always knows that, okay, I don't have to focus on it, but the results weeks later, if I show him a hook or some sort of an off balancing technique or whatever, that I use another technique above his rank to give him those new attributes. Now he understands that a little bit better, but he forgot the move completely. He'll forget the technique completely. That's what he'll ask me about it. But yeah, so yeah, I definitely agree with you there. Don't give them too much. Students can't handle a lot, especially when they're newer. So Yeah.
It, to
Yeah,
me,
when they, yeah.
it just sounds like he has a poorly designed curriculum, and that may come from the fact that he's just not a very talented martial artist and doesn't know enough to teach you more, you know. So he's kind of spread it out super thin, because he wants to kind of fill up this time. But
I agree with that. Yeah. So in
Also-
some ways.
also, older martial artists tend to have learned less moves and learned them better than modern martial artists, because our attention span has been constantly going down. And to make a marketable school, you have to be able to entertain people for long periods of time. So more modern martial artists have acquired more things in their tool bag because out of necessity. But if you look at like really historical martial arts figures, their whole discipline could boil down to a couple of punches and kicks that they just mastered to a ridiculous level. And let's be honest, that's all you really need. If you look at some of the best competitors out there, like one of the issues we have with jiu-jitsu is that you get these people that are like black belts that have that are just monsters on the mat, but they might only know like a couple dozen techniques. And in order for them to entertain their students for years and years and years, they have to know all this other stuff. And it's not that important to being good at the art. And most people, like, so maybe, you know, another way you could look at your master situation is like, this guy's got a ton of wisdom, but I'm not taking the time that he took with every one of those techniques to really understand the wisdom he has to share with me, because I want to get to the next one and I want to be entertained. I'm not saying that's what you're doing. I'm just saying that's what could be happening. One of the things that we're trying to accomplish with One Way is hybridize these two systems. Traditional martial arts is all about testing, and there's some pros and cons about that. And more modern martial arts tend to be about attendance and performance, and there's some pros and cons about that. On the traditional side, you get a lot of martial artists. Sometimes you get martial artists like on the bad side of that system, you get martial artists that know a lot. They can walk through a lot of forms, but they don't really know anything really well, so that when they go to spar, they don't do very well. And on the more progressive side of things, they are very good at sparring and they know a few things very well, but they're terrible teachers and they can't keep people entertained long enough to achieve high level skill. And so what we're trying to do is we have a two-part system where you earn merits on your belt, stripes on your belt, just like you do in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and those are just given out in class. And they're based on attendance and your attitude and your technical ability and your knowledge of the curriculum. But then at a certain point, like when you go from white belt to yellow belt, you have to evaluate, which is our form for testing, and you have to demonstrate all of that curriculum to a high level of proficiency. And if you don't do that, you can't go up. And so what that does is it's kind of the best of both worlds. You got the gating mechanic, which is the striping, so that if people have a bad attitude or they're not actually very good, they can't get the stripe. Okay. But then at some point they have to prove that they know this bulk of knowledge, so that one day when they get their black belt or beyond, they are competent teachers and they have a wealth of knowledge to teach. Because, you know, Bruce Lee would always say, like, I have one shorter leg, and so the way I fight my fight is different than the way you should fight your fight, right? So everyone has their own way of fighting. Like if you and I sparred, there would be like all these weird things that you would throw at me that I'd be like, I've never thought about that. I've never seen that before. And there'd be a lot of weird things that I would throw at you and you'd be like, whoa, that's interesting. And we would learn from each other, right? That's what martial arts is all about. But we can't even get to that level of discussion until we've addressed this broader knowledge base that everyone needs to know to be a proficient teacher. Yes.
If I can hop in there.
Yeah.
I've been sitting and listening and waiting for like the buzzer moment, and this, I think that was it. So listening for the past, little bit here, there was a moment where you were talking, Sensei Ramsey, and we were talking about the relationship between master and student, and rank as a function or as an expression of that relationship. And I think, you know, I'm trying to formulate this thought, and I'm throwing it, like I'm hitting the buzzer now because I'm going to throw it out, and I want to hear what both of you have to say about this. So the initial thought is, okay, if rank is an expression of, or the function of, the relationship between a master and that master student, right? Like another master can't come in and say, actually, that kid's a green belt. The student's master will say, no, that kid's a yellow belt or a blue belt or whatever it is. The only way any kind of standardization can happen, if that is even the goal, but the only way any understanding can happen is through the conversation like this, right? Like it becomes a relationship not between master and student, but between master and master, right? Like that is the way to bridge the gap between going into another school and looking at the students and going, oh, I don't really know if these ranks match up, right? Mm-hmm. Like you would have to go into that master's office or meet them on Zoom or, you know, whatever it is, and say, can you tell me about your standards, right? Like, can you tell me why this is happening? And then you meet minds and you meld and you say, huh, maybe I can bring that standard home with me, or maybe I offered something, so that across the board, as this master to master communication starts happening, that's where the kind of standardization.
I think a lot of people, myself included, are just fed up with the fact that there's no standardization in the martial arts. And so we're always being labeled as this or that. And my sense by talking to a lot of people is that people don't really care what the standard is. They just want there to be a standard so that we know what we're talking about. And I agree, but I think the only way forward is to be like internally with your school or your system and just try to have integrity there, because you can't really control what's going on outside of that. Now, what we can do is we can be charismatic, we can be accepting, and we can reach across the aisle and we can say, look, you do, you know, kendo, but I'd love to have your skills involved in what I'm teaching in my martial arts. Let's figure out how we can harmonize together, how we can come together. And that's what we're trying to do with One Way, is bridge those gaps and bring people together and find that common ground. And I agree with you, Jesse. I think it has to be master to master. Too much of the conversation has been student to student, trying to understand what their masters are doing, and what they don't know enough about the martial arts and how it all kind of fits together to really be able to have a meaningful conversation. And sometimes we've been sort of left to our own devices here in the West because our masters didn't have that conversation with us when we became masters. So we're all confused. But it's a conversation that definitely has to happen.
Yeah. So the last thing I wanted to, I agree with that. Yeah, for sure. I think the last thing I wanted to bring up was that I didn't touch on before was the ranks of after black belt. Mm-hmm. And obviously I touched on why I even started thinking about this, you know, being in an organization that ranked people rather high in a short period of time. You know, I think Marsh, you know, you had said this before, where Americans seem to be obsessed with Dan ranking, and putting it that way just was brilliant, because I agree with that, and I think that we value the Dan ranking system way too high, to the point where people are signing you know, a fifth Dan or you know, titles behind their name and stuff. I feel like a lot of it is I don't want to say showboating, but hey, look at me. Oh, just so you know, I'm Shihan. Oh, just so you know, I'm the Soke. Hey, just so you know, whatever, right? And you know, for me, and this is just a personal opinion, for me, the reason I want my students to get as much knowledge as possible leading up to black belt, without making a ridiculous standard like you had mentioned before, of being way too high of a standard to the point where it's not even reachable, within a decent amount of time. But you know, if a nice length of time goes by and they excel and they're able to demonstrate, and that's what I want. And then if I promote them to black belt, then I expect also that my black belt student now comes to class with the mentality, even though I have a couple rankings above black belt, I want them to come to class knowing, hey, look, I don't care if I get Nidan or Sandan or Yanda. I don't, I want them to come with that mentality of, I'm now just, I got my black belt, I'm here to learn, I'm just here to get better. And then in that mentality, they will get ranked without specific criteria holding them back specifically. Now, I do have criteria because, I talked to somebody with the same viewpoint as you, and he was like, you know what, you can't just give them everything up to black belt and have nothing after. Realistically, they're not going to have any goals thereafter. And, because he personally, saw many black belts stop after black belt because they were just, they weren't getting it, information fast enough. And so, or they didn't have enough information. And so he said, you need a little bit afterwards, give them something to strive for, the super advanced stuff, maybe the stuff that isn't as practical, but still teaches you good stuff, some of the secrets, if you will, just higher end things that maybe a 1 year in person won't comprehend. So I kind of stuck with that idea. But again, my black belt, I want them to have the mentality of, I don't care what rank I am. All I care about is about getting better, improving my own martial arts. Even if I never get the title of Kyoshi or, Sifu or any of those, any title you can possibly think of. Why do I bring that up? Again, I lived it. Colleagues of mine spent years and years and years aiming for the title of Shihan in that system, even though they didn't even have the respect. They lacked the same amount of respect I lacked for those instructors and everything, but they stuck around to get a title in this ranking, and that personally bothered me a lot, and we've had our talks. It's like, why are you hanging out? Why are you going to let the validation of somebody you don't respect matter to you so much? One of my students was a brown belt under my ex-teacher, came to me, after I opened my school and said, he's like, yeah, well, I was just gonna get my black belt before I left. I was like, you can't do that. I was like, do you respect him? Do you think that he's going to promote you to black belt when you deserve it? Blah, blah, blah. And ultimately he was like, no, I really wouldn't respect his black belt. I said, okay, then you shouldn't get it. Like, what does it matter? Right? You shouldn't get it from somebody you don't respect. And so I said, if you're gonna learn under me, I'll teach you to the standard I want to uphold you to, and make sure that you still uphold the standards, and then I will test you. And the reason that we're doing that is because he's going to respect my standardization or my criteria for him for black belt way more than he's going to respect that of my instructor. And it's not gonna, that kind of tells you something. So when I want a black belt of mine to come into the dojo, I never want them worried about criteria again. I don't want them worrying about anything, no titles. I don't want them worrying about missing out on techniques. They're going to get all the information. They absolutely will. Even if they wanted it early, it doesn't bother me. But I just want to know that they're there to learn. And you can tell who wants to learn and who doesn't. You can tell who's genuinely interested in the martial art. At least I believe so. As opposed to the person who's just there to rank up, if you will, because they meet the criteria and they rank up. I think that if you're going to be, a higher level Dan, if you will, then I think it should be based on time and merit more than any kind of criteria technique wise. It should, you know, and I know some systems will do that. They'll say, hey, look, 5 years after black belt or 2 years or whatever, so much mat time, you'll be eligible for second degree black belt. And then another 3 years, you know, and that's how some systems work. And I think that's much better. And then it shows a commitment. But again, we still don't have that standardization. I believe it used to be more standardized across the board, but then with all these different martial arts and everybody opening their own schools and not upholding any one standard anymore, that we're getting right back into, okay, well, now I'm going to promote you because you have the criteria and you don't have nearly as much time.
Sure.
How dedicated are you? And some of these and my own friends are not super dedicated to the martial art, and they haven't been, and yet but they're meeting the criteria. So they're doing the bare minimum, right? It's like you have 100 people in med school, right? What do you call the person who gets straight A's and the person who just barely passes?
Mm-hmm.
Doctor, right? So the person just barely passing is still called doctor. But I don't think that should be the idea in martial arts, where you can just pass the criteria and be considered. It'd be the same as saying, oh, hey, you've been a black belt for 5 years. Here's your second degree black belt. That also shouldn't be. I don't know if that's the criteria in some places, but so that's kind of my outlook on that. So that when I meet somebody who's fifth dan and they flaunt the idea that they're fifth dan, and I've met people like that at seminars, they act a different way, if you will. Maybe it's just their personality, I'm not sure. But when I meet other people who are of a dan status like that, in my experience, I haven't been pleased in certain groups. So
that's one of the drawbacks of the testing system. Okay, so with the testing system, it's like, well, if you know these things, you get the next rank. And we have that with our academic system, where it's like you can kind of have a bad attitude and be a smart ass, and you can get good grades in school, and you can get your high certification at university. But the greatest thing about the martial arts is that you can't do that, and you have to become humble and learn your place and all this kind of stuff. And that's why that gating mechanic is so important too. I feel like, just because you know your curriculum doesn't mean that you can get that next rank. And, to be totally honest with you, if you sat down with me for like 3 or 4 hours, we could teach you the curriculum you would need to test for your yellow belt, no problem. And you'd be able to kind of do it. But that doesn't mean you really know it. You can like kind of walk through it. You know what I mean? Like that takes a lot of time and dedication. And so that is signified by those stripes that you're earning on your way up, that gating mechanic. And I'm a big believer that you can't just sit at black belt and expect, like, if 5 years go by that you're going to get that next rank. Mm-hmm. You have to be putting in your time. You have to be training. It doesn't count unless it's active training. And so many people say things like, oh, I've been training for 20 years, but they've actually only trained for like 4 years consistently out of 20 years. That's just a big lie. And that's how people get deluded. And then they think that they're a lot better than they really are. I'll say one thing. So I think for us to have this discussion, we have to break open this idea that in traditional martial arts like Taekwondo, black belt is just the beginning. But in Western martial arts like Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, black belt is the destination. And one thing I found so weird to me when I first started doing Jiu-Jitsu, and I've done it for a long time, is that people would get stripes on their black belt and it'd be like, yeah, cool. It would be like getting a stripe on your blue belt. And I'd be like, no. Those are really different. But for Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu people that I knew over the years, they didn't really think that much of it. And then I heard Helio Gracie talk about the stripes. And he's like, oh, these don't mean anything. These are just for teaching, like, your experience teaching. And I thought, wow, that's so different. Because in traditional martial arts, like Taekwondo, they mean a lot. There is a massive difference between a first, second, and third degree black belt and a 4th, 5th, and 6th degree black belt. And there's a massive difference between a 4th, 5th, and 6th and a 7th, 8th, and 9th. There's the difference between a professional and a non-professional. There's a difference between a professional and someone who's world renowned. And that it's just different systems. It's just, what do you want your system to meet? Like, they're not, none of them are wrong. But in my opinion, I like the system where there's more to aspire towards. And I actually think it's more marketable and fits more in line with what we're expecting. So basically, like in our school, we do 5 or 6 years to black belt. The industry standard is 3 years. In Korea, it's 1 year. But industry standard in the West is 3 years to black belt across all disciplines, karate, taekwondo, doesn't matter. In our schools, our minimum is 5. Sometimes people do it a little bit less because they're training like 3 hours a day. They're coming all the time and all this kind of stuff. But everyone knows why they're getting those ranks early. But a lot of times they'll take 6 or 7 years because the person takes a little break here or there. They only come in a few times a week, that kind of thing. But I tell everyone when they get the black belt that, guys, this doesn't mean you're an expert. This means you understand some of the fundamentals. Now you have to become an expert. In order to become an expert, you have to push yourself. You have to compete. You have to go out there and you have to make a commitment that martial arts is something you want to do for the rest of your life. I will not give a 4th degree black belt to anyone unless they want to do martial arts as a profession. Like they're of that mindset, right? Like it's really, really important to them. And that distinction is really different in our system, in our school. And I think one of the problems that most instructors have is they do not pre-frame for their students what these accomplishments mean. Like they just say, here's your yellow belt. They don't tell you what that means. Here's your green belt. They don't tell you what that means. I probably to nauseam tell my students what the meaning of the rank is. You know, I tell them when I put that yellow belt on that means you're an accepted student. Up until this point, you've been just trying to prove to me that you have the right mindset to do martial arts, that you have a healthy enough body to begin your training in earnest. And when you get that yellow belt, that signifies to me that I'm accepting you as a student. And I've had students cry when they got their yellow belt. It meant that much to them.
I like that actually. It's I like the way you do that. Yeah.
Thanks. When I give out my green belt, I say this means you're a veteran on the mats. You're someone who's been training at least 1 year. Everyone in here knows who you are. Everyone in here respects you because of the time and effort that you put in your training. It doesn't matter if you can win the match or not. Even if you're the little guy who always gets pinned, you have a lot of heart, and that's why you're getting this green belt. When I give out my blue belt, I say this means that you're someone that everyone looks up to. You're an inspiration. You've been training for over 2 years here on the mat, sometimes 3, and you're someone that everyone knows, everyone looks up to. You're a mentor for the lower ranks. Here's your blue belt. When you get the red belt, you know, this means that you're basically a clumsy black belt. You got good power, okay? But sometimes you're a little clumsy with your technique. Sometimes you don't have perfect economy of motion, perfect extension, but you know those fundamentals. And now in earning this red belt, it's all about refinement, about refining your character, about refining your technique so you can earn that black belt one day. And when you get that black belt, this is night. This is where you are a graduate of the school. You've learned those fundamentals, and now you're going to learn not just from me, but from the martial arts itself. You're going to go out there. You're going to learn from other instructors. You're going to ponder the thoughts yourself as you go and compete. And people start beating you with different techniques. You're going to think, maybe I should learn those techniques. Maybe I should figure out what's my game. What's my game? How do I play the martial arts? And when you know what that game is, that's when you're a 4th degree black belt. When you have your own way of fighting that is yours and yours alone, that's been refined over decades of practice, that's when you're a master instructor. And we lay that out for the students from like day one, and they really understand it. And that's why, you know, we have a plaque up on the plaques. You know, most schools, they have plaques on the wall. They start at like 1st degree black belt. Our plaques start at blue belt. Okay. You get up on the wall as a blue belt. You're up on the wall as a red belt, because we're trying to take the eye off the black belt. We're trying to realign people to understand that it's not just a single destination that we're aiming for. So.
Okay. Yeah. I, nothing to add to that. That's great. Yeah.
But
I
you
was never
mentioned-
explained. Nobody ever explained, the meaning. I never thought about the explanation of what each belt really means. You know what I mean? So I'd like that you do that with your students, because I think that's important for sure. So I've never even tried to articulate, what the meaning of something could be other than black belt, which I've already discussed. But all the other belts in between, can be an eye opener for people. It reminds them of what they're doing and why. Yeah.
Yeah. And then how, as master to master, can we even begin to discuss and articulate what we feel a belt means unless we put words to that meaning? Like, do you feel like this person's a leader on the mat? Because if they're not, they shouldn't be a blue belt. Do you feel like this person is capable of generating great power? We make all of our red belts break a brick, okay, to get their red belt, to show that they got that power, right? This is something we can concretely talk about. We can concretely appraise people. Yeah. And I think that's one of the problems in the martial arts is nobody knows what anything means, and even the masters behind the masters don't know. And so I just decided we're gonna create something, and that's what it is. And you can create your own thing, like, in your school and whatever you teach, Kempo karate or whatever. I studied Shorin-ryu karate, and we had a little bit different meaning for all the ranks. And I discovered them over years and years of reading books and researching things, and I kind of learned it, And in traditional karate, you got like your white belt, which has a very similar meaning, heaven and stuff like that. And then it's a little bit different in the sense that it's more about the fading, the soiling and the fading. Your first goal is to get your black belt, which symbolizes that you have an inner fire that you can use at a time of need. And so your belt is getting darker and darker as it gets dirty, or from blood, sweat, and tears and grime and all that kind of stuff. And then finally, when you get your black belt, it starts to lighten and reveal that white cotton core, the interior core, to show that you need to, even though you might have a darkness inside, you need to cover it over with a gentleness so that you can live amongst the flock. And so that's what the soiling and the fading mean. And in our program, we have both of those meanings incorporated into our ranking system, but the karate ranking system. And if you look at the karate belts, they had white belt, yellow belt, green belt, brown belt, black belt, right? And then some other colors were added later, but those were the original colors. And, yellow belt was to represent the initial salt stains. Green belt was a little bit getting moldy. Brown belt was getting really grimy, and then black belt, right? And that's why those colors existed. Yeah.
That's cool. Awesome.
We could talk forever.
Yeah, I know. Heavy topic, but I think we covered most of it. So that's really good. Yeah, I mean, in the end, every instructor is going to look at their students and judge them, based on their own criteria. And that's how we have so many different people of different abilities and, whatever else, walking around with different ranks and stuff. Mm-hmm. And we just have to, I guess we just have to, accept it. When I meet somebody, I mean, the last thing I even care about, honestly, is their rank. What bothers me is when somebody announces their rank to me. Sure. In conversation as if it's supposed to mean anything to me. It'd be like, if you got on every day and said, hey, Ramsey, it's me, Master Olds, 8th Dan. How are you today? Like that would bug the crap out of me, But you get that. It's not often, but it's just that idea of people just taking their rank too seriously. And I'm more about information than I am a rank. And what's important is that, because I have no specific master instructor leading over me, heading me. So, I have instructors, but nobody to further rank me, if you will, in the existing martial arts that I do. I don't rank myself because that would be absolutely pointless and hypocritical of myself. But, that's one reason why I say, look, Ramsey, I'm doing this for myself, not for anybody else. and I don't need, and my, my titles or my Dan rankings are insignificant compared to what I'm trying to learn. So I want to learn and be as good as I can get, and that's really all I can ask for. So that's my mentality. And
Can I ask you a question?
if I had it, I would just end it at black belt. Everybody would get the black belt, and that would be the end of it. It would just make it so much more easy and be like, oh, okay, you're black belt too? Awesome, great. How long have you been training? Oh, fantastic. And we can have cool conversations like that. I've had those conversations where they point stuff like that out, and it's just concerning for me. Yeah.
It is.
Play with it.
It is a beautiful thing, though, when you're not the end all be all, and there's someone above you that can mentor you forward and put you in your place. It's a very humbling thing. And that's why, even though these days I'm really focused on doing my own thing, I'll never claim any rank that my master in Taekwondo hasn't given me, because that's, like you said, if you just say like, I'm ninth dan, it means nothing. Okay. But let's be honest, if you're doing your own thing and you say, I'm a black belt, that means nothing either. Like, it doesn't, it's arbitrary. You could say, I'm, a camel belt or whatever. You could just make up some rank. It's really, unless you're teaching exactly your master's curriculum and you're certified by his rank, you have your own black belt. The black belts you're giving out are in your own discipline, right? So either way, whether you say, I'm going to give out a ninth dan black belt or I'm going to stop it at black belt, it's kind of the same thing to me. And I think we're doing a disservice if we don't create a life pathway for our students that they can do their whole lives, because it's one of the few things that does that. Like I was saying, like there's no other thing out there that like creates like a stepping stone pathway that they can do until they're 70 years old. And that's what's so beautiful. So I would encourage you to say, don't just stop at black belt, maybe rank these people up higher than you. Jigiro Kano, he was a 0 dan. He never got any dan. They eventually gave him like 11th dan or something like that after the fact, but he never had any rank. And he would always say, how can I rank myself? I know there's nobody to rank me. So he just give out rank. That's kind of how I feel too. It's like I create this system and I'm just giving out the rank. Why do we have to ascribe so much pressure to it? Look at like gymnastics. They have ranking systems and stuff and ribbons and whatnot. But they don't say, well, that's not how my other gym that I trained at did their ranking system. It doesn't matter. Yeah. You create it however you want. This is your success plan. This is part of your curriculum that you're creating for your students to help them achieve success. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what anyone else is doing. And you could just wear street clothes and then they all wear uniforms and then you can rank them up to ninth dan if they want to, and you don't have any dan. You're just creating the system for them. At the end of the day, that's what it could be. So, but I think it's really important to create a pathway that they can do it for the rest of their life, because it will humble them. And I also personally myself believe that you should be under somebody, if you can stomach it. I don't know what happened with your master and stuff before, but it's like family relationships to me, right? They're the hardest, right? And the reason why they're hard is because they're long-term relationships. And even though they're hard, they teach us some really important things. And if we don't learn those things from our family, it's going to be hard for us to pass those down to the next generation. So, I've had masters that we've had conflict and stuff. And there are some masters that I've trained under so many different people that actually there's a couple that wouldn't talk to me. Okay. But I still respect those people, and I still try to reach out to them and rebuild those bridges, because that's what a family does. That's what a family does. Even my master, he has a different philosophy in the martial arts than I do. I still try to maintain that relationship. I don't often go to his school and train there, because like it's a very different standard, for my belts and his. And sometimes I feel frustrated by that, but I will always love and respect him. And I will always try to keep that relationship going.
Right.
So I think that's important.
Commendable. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I have teachers and other things that I don't have black belt rank in already. So they're the ones that humble me all the time.
Yeah. And you know how ego driven the martial arts can be if you let it. You know,
Yeah.
you're
Absolutely.
like the top dog and all this kind of stuff. And so if you don't have checks and balances on yourself, it's very easy to let yourself become deluded and egocentric. I would ask you one question too. Do you want your students to have respect for each other? So like, let's say you promote some black belts, right? You want those white belts to respect your black belts, right? You want your black belts to respect you. Then the line has to continue past yourself. I think, that's really important.
No, I agree with that. Absolutely. Yep. Cool. Yeah, great conversation, guys. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. I really appreciate it. I know it's gone a long time, so we'll wrap it up. But Sensei Veitch, always a pleasure. Always welcome on the show. I feel like today we went really deep. There's a lot of stuff.
It's as deep as you get.
Yeah.
So it's really interesting. I'm always interested in hearing other people's takes on it, and with your experience being vast in different martial arts, and especially ones that are straight from Korea and stuff, and having that influence, I'm going to end up utilizing some of the stuff you said today and incorporating it a little bit. That's how I do. So for sure.
Well, I'm going to take some of the things that you said to heart as well. And
Cool.
I mean, that's why we have these conversations, because
that's how I learned.
we only find ourselves when we test and prod ourselves against other people. We have a saying in the martial arts that, a great martial artist is not made by yourself. You need everyone else on the mat to help you achieve that success. And, Conversations from the Hearth has become that for us in a way, and not just for us, but for our students too. Thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Great to see you again, sir.
If you enjoyed that podcast, please consider liking and subscribing to our YouTube channel, as well as hitting the notification bell. We offer in-person, group, and private lessons at our facility in Kyle, Texas, as well as virtual lessons anywhere in the world. If you'd like to learn more about our programs, you can find us online at risingphoenixtkd.com.